Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dependent on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our sixth and final webinar in the series that we have been doing since we've all been in this really bizarre situation with COVID-19. So today what we're going to be talking about is unleashing the power of virtual events. And this is like a masterclass. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some examples, going to cover top tips that I have from personally delivering events over the past, say, 20 years, physical events and lots of online events. We have a, let me have a look. I'm going to move this slide on so I can prompt myself. Else otherwise I'll waffle and go off with the tangent. We have, everybody is on mute. And if you have any questions at all, there is a Q&A area. Please add your questions into the Q&A area and we'll discuss these at the end of the session. I will see them pop up. If you do have any issues at all, please do let us know. Now, as a registered user and attending the session, you will get a link to the recorded version, which we hold on YouTube in a hidden place. So do look out for that link. And also if we have any resources that we talk about, then we'll send those through as well in that follow-up email. Okay, I'm just going to double check because someone's just come through with something. Okay. Yeah, so everybody is on mute. If you do have any questions, do pop them in the Q&A area. And if you do want to speak to me directly afterwards, then no problem at all. So let's move on. So we're going to talk about virtual events. There are going to be lots of different things we're going to look at. And then we're going to talk about the Q&A at the end. So this agenda, I mean, it's really short and simple. I'm not going to go through all the different things I'm going to talk about because I'm just going to get on with this webinar and ensure that you get the most out of it. So let's begin. Now, virtual events, apples versus oranges. I mean, what do I mean by that? So why go virtual? It's a bit of a silly question given the situation that we're in, that practically most people now in a working environment have had to go virtual, especially in the environments that we work in academic publishing. But there are lots of reasons. So one thing I just want to note is that don't compare virtual and physical events, because it's like comparing apples and oranges. And there's loads that you can do in a virtual event, and then there's lots that you can do in a physical event that you can't do in either of those. But then there's lots of really good fun things that you can do in both. You really can't compare these events, and we just need to find the right solution for what you need to do. And like I said, there has been an explosion of events that's happened now online. And also, I think what we found interesting about these webinars is we haven't had the high level of registrations that we're expecting, because we started doing these webinars maybe 2 or 3 weeks after lockdown happened in the UK. What happened is there was just this huge surge of online events happening and webinars. So we've been able to really test what works best using all the different types of things like Facebook advertising and Twitter advertising and emails and speaking to people and what's worked best. And we measure everything that we do. So it's been really, really interesting as we've gone through these 6 weeks to find out what works best. So when you go virtual, you can practically accommodate any event. And I think one of the biggest things when we had the situation at the beginning was people said, oh no, we're going to really miss out on that physical networking. You know, standing around having a glass of something and chatting to people in a room. Well, you can do that virtually, it's just different. But also in terms of holding panel discussions can be done through webinars as well. There's ways, for example, that you can, when people register, you can have a question that's added into the registration form. So you've got a way of what you want to ask your panel, or in terms of like the type of theme of questions that you're getting through. So that's a little bit of a tip there. Also in terms of training, a lot of trainers who didn't do virtual before are now having to go to a more virtual environment and using lots of different resources out there. And we're going to cover some of the free tools that I'm identifying, but there are so many out there. Also in terms of delivering conferences, you know, these have been happening online for years. So there's lots of great benchmarks to use and hints and tips. But also you don't have to shut down a conference, you can carry on and do it. And exhibitions as well. Years ago, I think, God, it must have been like 2009, 2010. So we're talking like 10, 11 years ago. I remember attending a session that I went into the conference and I could see the presentations that were happening. And then I could go into a different area on this site, which was the exhibition area. And I could go to the virtual stands that were done. And I could go to the virtual stands with the logos of the companies, and there would always be someone there manning the stand, and I could ask them questions. And because it wasn't just dependent on their experience then and there, they could go off and they could send an email, or they could ping someone in their company to ask them, and then they come back to me relatively quickly with an answer. So that actually, just because you can't have an exhibitor physical space doesn't mean that you can't do it virtually, and actually some parts of it work even better. And then people also don't feel so bad about walking away or just, you know, browsing around and ignoring them because it's electronically, so they feel that they can do. Also, in terms of reducing the carbon footprint, you are not having to travel so much, you are predominantly staying at home, and so using these kind of virtual services allows there to be a really good environmental impact, and that can often be very helpful as well with companies that have an environmental impact policy. You can stream from any location that you're in, as long as you've got really good broadband or really good connection. So that's important, but it does mean that, you know, you never know where I'm sitting. I mean, I am actually sitting in Wales, in South Wales, in not, you know, in another hemisphere, but in the UK. And I'm sitting in my office. Now, I could actually be sitting by a ski slope, about to go skiing, you know, just after this. I mean, I haven't been skiing for years, so I don't even know why I came up with that. Or I could be, you know, sitting in a room and then I'll walk out and there's a beach there. That's more my cup of tea. So there's a flexibility there. And you can also, with virtual, there's different things that you could do. So you can create breakout sessions that you can drop in and out of, as well if you're attending a conference or even if you're hosting a conference. Now, the content of this webinar is going to be around what you can do when you host an event virtually, but also it'll be talking about you attending events as well, but mostly about hosting, to give you some ideas. Better accessibility, I mean, that's just key, and that goes hand in hand with reducing your carbon footprint and streaming from your location. If you've got any specific physical or mental disabilities as well, or challenges, being virtual can really help and means that you're more accessible to people. So one thing that I learned through the years that I've done talks and presentations is that people don't come to hear you, to see you specifically. They want to hear the information that you've got to give. And I think then someone added on that you're selfish if if you're finding it a bit challenging to go up on a stage and talk. I thought that's a bit harsh, but you know, I get their point, and actually that does resonate with me. But it does mean that for the short window of time, you can just not put on your video, or put on your video if you want to. You can see I'm on here because, you know, why not see me? Because I don't mind. And it means that I'm more accessible to you as a person. And also because you can ask lots of questions as well to me, because I am here live. This is not a pre-recorded session, unless of course you are watching this on demand. Okay, so have one event or split it over a series of weeks. So I just want to show you a really nice example of someone that's done this because of COVID-19 situation. So Alps had the University Press Redux conference that I was going to, and that was cancelled, and it was a paid for registration event. And what they have done is they've actually created a number of free webinars, so it's a little bit of advertising for them as well anyway, over a series of weeks that you can attend. So you can pick and choose what you want to go to, and they've basically cut it down into more digestible chunks. So you can have one big event, which we're going to talk about one of those in a moment, or you can split it out over a series of days and weeks, for example. You can have an event that's open to everyone, or if you're looking for a specific type of strategy where actually you want to earn some money from it, you can either paywall the content after. So if people want to access the on-demand content after, then they can, then they'll have to pay, or you keep it free afterwards for a limited amount of time, and then turn it into content that they will want to buy. And So that is effectively paying to access. So that leads me on to say content is king. It really has to be content that is valuable to what the audience is wanting. It has to really resonate with them, and it has to address the needs that they want. And if you think of like a storytelling technique, for example, which is a way of how you write and talk to people, it's about resonating with the emotional side of people so that you grab them in with that hook and they go, yeah, that's why I want to attend that. And that's what's been really interesting for us with these webinars is we've tried different ways of speaking, we've done lots of different testing, and that's been actually quite exciting. And we've seen great number of registrations for some webinars and then really low registrations with others. So actually, is it how we've talked about what the webinar is called, or is it how the description is? And how we're converting those people, because we also measure when people come in from the various different channels like Facebook advertising or Twitter advertising or organic, social, or even through emails. Zoom, for example, does a really great job of setting up specific dedicated URLs for you, so you can test to see who's coming into the landing page on Zoom, and then you can see how many people convert. So you've got a great way of looking at your return on investment compared to like how much time investment to set things up in Zoom and to run these webinars, and whether there are any costs, like you have any speakers. We, for example, had Nathan Ferrugia do a motivational webinar for us, and we had Louise Adams do a stress management webinar as well. And so those had costs associated with them, whereas the other 4 were me. And that is, you know, the cost is my cost, but that's to the business, so that's different. So content is absolutely king. It's really got to be what people are going to spend their time to come and listen to. So you need to define what's your objective. You need to measure your return on investment, which I talked about, ROI. I know that that can sound quite commercial, but actually it's very important because your time is really valuable and you'll never get that time back. You know, that we're just getting older and older and older and older, and we just never get that time back. So just make sure that you're measuring the return on your investment and stop doing things that aren't effective or aren't successful, because times change. And you know, how do you want to position yourself? Do you want to position yourself as a thought leader? What's your main objective for running a virtual event? It could be your library, and you're wanting to connect with the community, and you want to let them know about the fantastic free resources that they've got available, like ebooks that they didn't even realize that they had. Or you could be an academic publisher who's looking to reach out to the research community and help them to publish with you. So you're increasing the quality submissions that you're getting by teaching them how to write a title for an article that's going to be better with SEO and picked up and discovered. So number of different ideas, and you know, even if it's not related to academic publishing or to libraries, even if it's related to your own personal objectives, you know, there's always got to be a reason that you're doing it for. So I went through and I thought, do you know what, I'm just going to list a number of tools. Now, some of these might be familiar to you. These are all the ones that I've worked on through the years. So Google Hangouts is in there because it's like Skype for Business or Skype at the moment. I don't have Skype here on the moment because, as I understand it, not Skype itself, but Skype for Business will be phased out because they're trying to encourage you to use Teams more. So you can use all these different types of services like Skype, Google Hangouts, and Teams to host webinars if you want to. There are other ones, Adobe Connect, you've got WebEx, Zoom, which we're in right now, which has a separate webinar function. But there are so many different ones to choose out there, and you just need to decide which one works right for you. I mean, how do you decide that? We're going to cover that in a moment to give you some ideas, but there are just a plethora of them out there. And it ultimately depends what you want to do with them. But, you know, these are just some of them, and you'll probably find that maybe you know more than this. I just did a quick bit of a search about the top ones for 2020. So you can go into Google, for example. So how to find the right tool, how to find the right service that you want to deliver these webinars with, or these events, or this conference, or you want to have an exhibition element. Well, as I mentioned before, you have to decide, what is my main objective for hosting this event? What do I want to achieve from it? what is the most important in terms of the features. So often you can go to a search engine, like I mentioned Google before, you can go into Bing, you can go into a number of different search engines that you prefer to use, and dependent on where you are country-wise, because some are blocked in, like China, for example, don't have Google. You can see if they have tables in terms of like a feature comparison. So there's things that you might say, you know, are really important, that you want to have interactive tools in there, like you can in Zoom. You want people to be able to raise their hand, you want to do a survey, you want to ask questions, you want to poll people. That kind of level of interaction, that's really important for you. That how it records it for you. So I'm just going to use Zoom as an example here because we're in it at the moment, but Zoom, when it records for you, it does it in audio, and it will do it in an MP4 as well. So if you say, for example, want to use the content in a podcast, then you podcast, sorry, then you can do that. So you really need to decide what ultimately you want to do with it, and then what features are most important for you. And also, are analytics really important for you? Now, for me, analytics are, and Zoom's analytics aren't great, but there are other functionality in Zoom that I'm enjoying at the moment. Not to say that I'm forever going to use Zoom, but the thing with Zoom is I can pay monthly, and then I can cut it off if I want to when I'm not using the webinar side of it, which means that it reduces the cost. So I'm not paying an annual subscription, I'm paying a monthly subscription, and then I'm going to cut it off for the time that I don't need it. So that's just a little bit of a tip there in terms of how you can look at it in terms of return on investment. Just be mindful of what you might lose if you shut it off for that time being. So that you'd need to find out. So for example, if you've got any recordings saved inside Zoom, because it gives you a certain amount of storage for free, will they be deleted? Things like that. What systems they integrate with. So in terms of like what systems you already have, some systems integrate with Google Hangouts, for example. Some integrate with CRM systems. So it's really choosing something that's going to ultimately do what you want it to do. And it just could be a case that you're saying, do you know what, right now I just need to start with something really basic that's quite cheap and, you know, is going to allow me to interact like, you know, Zoom or Teams, but and then I'm going to work out exactly what I need from it. And there are lots of free trials that you can do out there. So if you do set yourself up for a free trial, just make sure that you use it in that time. And then if you do any recordings, then do them, make sure that they're saving to your computer. Also in terms of, I mentioned before about the interaction, so whether that's polls or surveys, and I'm going to show you some other tools that we use for getting for doing interactions which are outside of Zoom, for example. But like I can go into Zoom, and I do have a screenshot around this, but I can go into Zoom and I can ask you questions. I can set up a poll if I want to, and I can also do lots of other different things. And then also in terms of like the support. Now support's really important for me because I want to make sure that if there's support available, that I can get things done when I need to. Now there's one service, I'm not going to name them in case I'm going to send like a flurry to them, but what I do with them is, because they have, when you go to their website, this pop-up appears of a chat box so you can chat to people. So rather than going straight to their support people, when I want to get something answered then and there, I actually go to the website, the chat thing pops up, they don't know who I am, I just ask them a question, they answer it for me and I'm done. And then I'll say, you know, are you a client? You know, should you contact support? And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but you just answered my question straight away. So, you know, that's fine. That's how it works for me. Okay. So also in terms of how technologically advanced you want the service to be and exactly what you want it to do. And some of that comes with integrations. Do read the reviews that you find online as well. There are a number of different blog posts out there where people have done comparisons. And what I often find really helpful is when you watch a YouTube video and you can see the different types of functionalities, and people are saying, right, this is what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to set up a webinar and I'm going to run the webinar and see if I can record it. That's basically what I want to do. And then I'm going to use each of those services to do this. It's like when you can watch previews of phones and how they take pictures. And I find, because I'm very visual, I find that that's really helpful. YouTube, for example. As I mentioned, if you do make use of the trials, do remember to do a cancel reminder. I think it was Webinar Jam when I trialed that out, I had to pay like £1. And then after, I think it's like 14 or 15 days, then it'll start taking the money out. And you've got to be careful with some services that they don't do that auto renew, because you'll forget about it and then realize you've been paying for some time. And so make sure that you put in a cancel reminder. Also, just choose whether you want to have it live or on demand. Some services will accommodate you hosting live, and then maybe you've done some pre-recorded work, and so you can start those videos, and so it's like you're running your own conference agenda, but with pre-recorded content, but you're hosting it live. Does the service allow you to do that? Does the service just allow you to do it live like we're doing right now? Or does it also record it so that you have an on-demand version that you can repurpose and use how you want to? And then funnel marketing. Some of these services also help you in terms of how best you want to connect with your audience and the people that are watching. So there's a number of different ways that you can do that. And funnel marketing is basically getting someone in a workflow where you get them to maybe register, and then they get an email about this, and they come to the event, and then they'll get an email about being at the event, and they'll go into this funnel, and suddenly they get lots of different emails, moving them through a pipeline, moving them through a process to ultimately get them to purchase something or purchase a training course. And that's what funnel marketing is all about. It's not just about touching someone once, it's about sending them off dependent on what that person's needs and wants are, and sending them to the solution that you have to help them to address that. Okay, so something I just wanted to show you here is that some of these services will allow you to do annotations on the screen. I could do this live, but I've just shown you a screenshot here that if you are having like a brainstorming session, and you're having a session with a number of people, or you're doing a breakout session and you want it to be interactive, you can use this kind of like a whiteboard, or you can be discussing ideas and write text on the screen, and you can do things like spotlight, so I can have that little red dot appearing on the end of my arrow if I want to when I'm talking through something. I can scribble on here, I can put arrows to things. So this kind of service is really great for that. And you'll find a number of these different services will have those kind of tools. If that's important to you, that's going to be a distinct feature that you're looking for. So that will certainly knock some out. What I have found through time is that Zoom did a really good job. This is actually about Zoom meetings. So this isn't the webinars, but Zoom did a great job of some interactive tools that you can do as a participant to say, no, yes, I feel like I'm going to do some kind of TikTok thing in a minute. Great, celebrate, or coffee, I need a break, or, you know, the clock is, I'm away. And raise your hand, or yes and no, bit of a poll there, or go faster, go slower. So what's happened now is that there has been such a change with how some of these services have been delivering these solutions. Like, for example, Teams didn't used to have as many options as it does now over the past few weeks that have been released since, because there's so much demand with things like Zoom. It's been, you know, explosive, that the other services have really had to step up their game. So this is an example of Zoom. Now, one of my colleagues, if she happens to be in this training, she'll see herself. But this just shows you what you can do in Teams, for example, and you can do webinars in Teams, but maybe something that you want to do internally, but you can do it externally. And you can look at the settings. Often you'll find in these services those 3 dots, and you can see that you've got the settings here, and you've got some text that's appearing here. And so if you're presenting something to across the globe to a number of different countries, where maybe you talk a bit too quickly and people want to be able to understand better what you're talking about, then you can set up something like live captions. So you can see here that my captions of what I'm talking about at that time appear on this screen, and that can be quite helpful. Also, especially if there's some kind of audio issues for the person who's watching. This is just an example here of how you can blur out your screen. Now, when we took this picture, these screenshots just a few weeks ago, it just had blur my background, but Teams, as I mentioned, they've updated, and now you can have a number of different backgrounds, like many of these services do. Also, if you use some services, this feature might be important for you, but it's whether you can stream live to another channel. Now, right now, we are streaming live to Facebook, to my own profile rather than the company profile, because we're trialing all these different things. And the bottom picture is about YouTube, and then the one on the right hand side is Nathan's webinar that he did with us, which shows how it appears in Zoom, and so in Facebook. Now, normally when you go live in these platforms, you can actually see the different types of interactions that are going on, and people are talking to you, and you'll see who's coming in. I don't see that. I just see what's happening in Zoom. I do have open on the other side here, I do actually have my profile, so I could see about the live video that would be coming up, to see while we're live here today what exactly that I can see. And so I can see that people have started to share this. I can see that people are liking it, and that's really great to see, but I can't interact unless I have it on my screen here. So that's just something for Zoom, and it could change across the other services. Okay, so this is about improving attendee experience. Now, I've got a picture of Tamika Hayden here. Tamika, she's fabulous, and she gave me lots of really good hints and tips. In fact, I organized a call with some other people in my industry to talk with her about her event, the Research Impact Summit. And she has basically been running a conference or a summit online for the past few years, and it's a 2-day conference. And she gave us ideas about lessons that she's learned, about hints and tips that she told us about, that she's also learned over the years, but also in terms of like the structure that she does and how logistically she manages that. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that we learned in that session, and some of these are my own as well. But what you can do is pre-record sessions, because if you've got really good quality pre-recorded sessions, you can place these in, if you're doing like a conference, for example, into the areas that you really, into the conference agenda that you really want them to be. So you're not reliant on someone being there. However, what you can do is you can be live hosting, you can run the on-demand content, but then you could have that person there live for questions, but they don't actually have to do their session. You can mix up live and on demand as well. It really depends ultimately what you're looking to achieve and what kind of experience you want to deliver. Just as an example, Nathan, when he did the motivational webinar, he showed a video at the beginning. So he shared his screen, he showed a video at the beginning, and that's one good thing about Zoom, and some other services will do this as well and some won't, is that the people who are attending the webinar could hear the video. And some of these services, like if you're trying to share things when you're on like a Skype call or something, you don't hear what's on people's computers. So that could also be another important feature for you. But he showed some on-demand content, but then he was talking live. And also what was really nice about what he did is he had a flip chart behind him, and he drew on the flip chart and already had some pre-made information. So he kind of worked through that as a different way of presenting, because it's not just about you sitting here and being static. So make sure that you record your sessions, because there is a lot that you can do with them afterwards to repurpose them. You can cut them up into more digestible chunks. Show the presenter on screen like you're seeing me right now, because that's more personable. You know it's actually me and who I am and who's talking. So if you ever see me at a conference and event, you can also come and speak to me as well, because you know I'm very approachable. Conversation approach as well creates more engaging content. So this is where Tamika was talking about in some of the on-demand content that she has and the sessions that she runs. It's about sitting there talking to each other about certain topics and areas of interest, and because it's a more natural flow, it's more interesting in terms of what's being talked about. And it's like you watching a an interview that's not so structured. However, they do talk about what are we going to be talking about. Here are the questions I'm going to ask you. So have a think about the type of answers, but it's a much better flow. VAC learning style, that is something that we use at the International Bunch in our training. And VAC learning style is visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Now, I mentioned earlier that I am very, I like things to see things visually. That works really well for me. But I also like to do things like attend a workshop and sit down and brainstorm, or when someone's teaching me to do something, I like them to tell me, but I like to do it on my computer for myself. So that's how I learn best. So VAC learning style is how does someone get the best out of that experience and how do they learn the most? So that's something important to consider, that when you are presenting virtually, you need to keep people stimulated virtually. You need to keep them stimulating with what's going on with the sound, and also in terms of like how you want them to interact. Now, normally in these type of webinars, what I do is like a kinesthetic way of working. So I may get you to go to a tool like Mentimeter and add information into the cloud. That's what we've done in some of our webinars, or even ask you a poll during the session. And then I'd say, just in terms of with events, you always need to test, and test again. Sound quality, that's really important. Just invest in some good recording equipment. I actually normally have some different headphones that are wireless. I've just misplaced them, so I've got some other ones, but using headphones tends to work really well. You have to think about what directional mic that you're using. Either at the moment I could be using this mic, or I could be using my webcam mic, and I bought a specific webcam that does high definition. So that's really important, because you want people to be able to hear what you're talking about. Otherwise, they'll just see me going like that. Okay, also be in a well-lit room with a neutral background if you can. Now, I have a light on in front of me here. In fact, shortly I'm going to be changing my office around, so I'm going to have a dedicated space, because we do YouTube videos, and you can find our channel on YouTube at the International Bunch. And we do like a marketing hints and tips for the academic community. And so I'm going to be creating an area that's a dedicated space with some lights around. And actually you can go online and you can buy these kind of setups and a green background relatively cheaply. And if you buy that kind of green background, what it does, it enables you to change your background color if you want to. And even these services like Teams and Zooms, they will often work off of green background, so that you can place the screen exactly where you like. Sometimes when you use like blur background or the features that they have available, if you move around, you're not quite, it's kind of guesstimating where you are. And so it might, cut a bit of you off, and it doesn't look as professional. But there are lots of different kits available for you online. But just make sure that if you haven't got anything like that, just use a good mic. I have to say that phones have really great mics on them. We use ours for podcasts because the quality is really, really clear and really good, even though we have a professional mic. And have the light in front of you. I know at the moment I've got my light behind me, but if I was having my calls earlier with the light behind me, which I've had a number of meetings today, I'm actually quite dark in the background, and we don't want that. So I've got a big ring light on in front of me. The only thing I'll just mention about ring lights is that when you're looking into it and your camera's in the middle, is that your eyes will have that light in the middle in the pupil. So just as a reminder, if the light is behind you, it can darken you. Dealing with interruptions. So I still have my interruption going on at the moment. And hopefully you can't hear that, but a great example is Robert Kelly live on BBC News, and his little girl, his door is shut, and I know that we're going to say here, keep your door shut. The little girl comes in, and then the baby comes in on the walker, and then his wife rushes in and drags them out. So very funny. But he just carried on, he just kept going, and his wife sorted it all out. So where you can, shut your doors, but also have a dedicated space, because you want people to concentrate on the content that you have and the content you're delivering and what you're delivering, not what's kind of going on around you. I've just bought a screen that actually is going to go behind me with, I think it's just got butterflies on. It's like the best that I could get. And that's just going to mean that if I can go anywhere and anything behind me is hidden, because I don't want to have, I want to avoid having too much complex pattern behind me, but also movement and noise, and noise in terms of visual noise. So also organize when deliveries are going to happen. That's really important. If you can do, sometimes it's not possible, but try and make sure that you are reducing the interruptions that you're going to be getting. If you're doing a webinar, for example, and you're in the office, get a dedicated meeting room, put a note on the outside saying, please be quiet. We're in the live webinar in progress. If you're in a room with others, then put yourself on mute when you're not speaking, but be mindful that if you have things like paper around and they start doing this, or they start looking through stuff, you can really hear that, and also you can hear them coughing. So I'd usually recommend actually don't be in the same room together, unless of course you're doing like an interview, or where you're talking one-on-one with each other, or a panel discussion in that respect. So I'd probably say have your own dedicated space, and you might even be lucky enough to have your own dedicated pod. So as I mentioned before, mute when not speaking. You don't want to, you want to reduce the type of noise that people are going to hear, and you want to ensure that there's a really good sound quality. Also, this is something that we did recently in the webinars that we did, like with Nathan, is that I took my video off so that you didn't see me answering people when they're in the chat, asking me various different questions, or if I was looking on Facebook Live and I wanted to see what was happening, what was going on there. So you didn't see me going like this all the time, or like this, or writing notes or something. That's distracting. So I just turned myself off, so you just saw my pretty picture, me in spots, because I'm always in spots, probably, highly likely. Also, if you've got a challenging panel discussion that is going to be quite contentious topic in the industry, then just make sure that you have a really strong and competent chair, and lay the ground rules with your panelists about what you're going to be talking about, and how best that you can deal with these situations, and also how you can pull things back in and stop people running away with themselves. Quite hard when it's a very topical discussion. And that's a quite fortunate thing, when you can run events like this, and it's a webinar, for example, everyone is on mute. So then I'm funneling everyone's communications to say, put things in the Q&A area, and then I would have someone that is dedicated to picking up specific questions, and then maybe they would be saying to me, hey Lou, so-and-so has asked this, or even don't mention people's names. That's something that is probably good to do with the privacy side. So use a format that works. Pretty tricky, hey? But once you've decided what your main objective is for what you want to do with your event, you can show the presenter and the slide deck as a split screen if you want. I saw that done at a conference recently. Can you imagine a face-to-face conference that I went to, researcher to reader, the last one that I went to when this was all kicking off. So they had a presenter that couldn't attend, and they streamed on the stage. They had half of him talking, and then the other half was his slide deck, and that worked really nicely. Make sure that you use a chat box to engage users. So, for example, I know that people are filling in the Q&A area at the moment, and there seem to be lots of questions, which is really great. Have a well-promoted hashtag for social conversations. So when you have an event, make sure that either it's for each event, or if you just have a generic hashtag, make sure that that is well publicized and that people can see that, because often you find a lot of conversation happens online, and you've got a way of tracking and tracing what that conversation is and what's being discussed, because you have a dedicated hashtag. But do check on the relevant platforms whether that hashtag is already used, and if so, what it's used for, just to ensure that you're not using something that is currently being used at the moment and is going to cause you a lot of noise when you try and analyze, but also a lot of confusion for people when they click on that hashtag to see what's going on in the industry and for that event. You can run concurrent sessions at the same time. So just like going to a conference and having breakout sessions, you can do that. You can have a number of sessions going on. You can pop in and out, as we mentioned before. And then for a conference, Tamika had said to us, from her perspective, a maximum would be about an hour and a half with a Q&A and then a break. And then from my perspective, for webinars, we know that data tells us that usually 20 to 25 minutes is a good time for a webinar. If you imagine people only have half an hour between meetings, and often people just have half an hour, that actually that's a good time for a webinar. So 25 minutes for the webinar, including the introduction, including, you know, getting started promptly, always a good thing to do. You'll have a recorded session that people can access afterwards, and then have a 5-minute Q&A. And anything you can't answer, then make sure that you take a note of it, and then you address it specifically to people after, or have it as part of your follow-up of your post-marketing activity. And have someone managing the chat, as I mentioned before. So that means that myself as a host, I can just continue with what I'm doing. But if you've got a lot of people that have registered or attending, or you know it's going to be a topic that people need lots of support on, then they can help to filter out the questions at the end, rather than me sitting here and going through it and going, oh, what's that? Hang on a second, let me just read this. And that's not a great experience for you. You want a nice, clean flow. Also, something that I will mention as well is when you run a webinar, for example, or you're running a panel session, if you've got slides, then have a printout of your slides available to you so that you can simply carry on and run it. And someone else, say, for example, can then share their screen and run the slides that's presenting with you. So you make sure that you share those slides, just in case, like if the internet dropped off. The other thing that I also recommend, and I'm not doing it at the moment, but I do recommend, is to dial in on a phone number, because if the internet did go, you wouldn't lose me. I'd still be here, and I can still go through the presentation even though I can't share my screen. So that is like a just in case. So access to content. Now, it's looking to have the right service for the right event, and you may find that different services are applicable to those different types of events that you want to do. You might just want to trial out first of all and decide, you know what, this isn't right for me, or yes, I want to do more with this. Publish your content online and link through to it, and then you can easily do tracking and measuring. Automate as much as possible. As I mentioned, some of these services have integrations with other systems, even with like MailChimp or Salesforce.com or different CRM systems. So that means that you can have registrants automatically going into your system. Maybe they then go into a funnel. You don't have to rely on these services and these tools to send out emails for certain things. You can do it in another system. Often you can turn these off. Also integrate with social platforms, as we talked about before, and so streaming live. So at the moment I am live on Facebook to my own profile to test to see what the level of engagement that we have, because even though the International Bunch works within the scholarly communications field, the subject of this content is very applicable to a wider audience than that, hence why I'm doing that to test it out. And I can see, you know, more people are liking it, and I've got people viewing, which is great. I do love that. I can see that, as well as seeing it in here as well. To charge or not to charge? Well, this is a really good idea from Tamika, is that for the Research Impact Summit, it's free to register, it's free to attend. After a certain amount of time, the on-demand content, the recorded content, becomes gated, becomes paywalled, because that's how she sustains herself as a business. But you can attend the session, and she has really good engagement in terms of like people that register and then come and attend her her Impact Summit. She's got really good conversion rates there. So what's nice here is, what I use her example is, you can have a free ticket, or you can give $9 to a charity. If you're a publisher, for example, you could give to like a book library charity. There are many, like all over the world, where you have libraries pulled by donkey carts in certain parts of Africa, or ones to help disseminate books to libraries which have been in, you know, horrific situations, world events that have happened that have devastated libraries. And so you can do a contribution there if you want to. This one was specifically when there was the terrible wildfires that were happening in Australia, and this was about providing an injured koala with support and help. So how much it gave them for eucalyptus branches per day. So that's something that's quite nice to do, and you don't have to do that. You've got two options. So making the most of virtual networking. Now, we talked about this before, and this is about how people want to network, and people said, well, I can't do physical networking anymore. That's okay. Just create spaces to facilitate conversations in different topics. You can have different places that people can log into, and you have maybe a couple of people in there who are chairing those discussions and running those topics, a bit like a breakout session, but you can still do that. And you can have people talking to each other, or you can do it through chat. You can mix it up. You can ask them polls. You can get them to use like Mentimeter, for example, as a tool. You can mix up a room. So say, for example, if you've got a conference, you can say, well, I know this person's really outspoken and I know this person's quiet. So let's put those in a room together, because they'll, the person who's more outspoken will be more proactive and help the person who's not so confident or a bit more shy, for example, as long as you possibly prep that more outspoken person so they don't talk over everyone. But you can mix up rooms as well, which is really good fun. And you can mix up, as I said, live chat and live talking. And this is also a great way of using a social hashtag, and maybe on the screen you could share the conversation that's happening online in social. You can run surveys as well. So we use Mentimeter. We use the free tool Mentimeter, and there is a paid version. But what we do is we ask various different questions. For example, so that's a great idea there of testing what people are understanding in the industry. Blind date is also another one where you could say, give people, like, anyone who has an odd number, you go to this room, anyone who has an even number, go to this room, or you send two people off together to have a blind date. You know, they've never met each other. Maybe it's an early career person and someone who's effectively could be a great mentor. They don't know who they're going to be in a room with, but you could also set them a challenge, and they have to go online or go and use some kind of platform, or even a publisher's platform, to find some specific content. ProQuest, for example, an aggregator, was always great for that, for finding really interesting tools and things, really interesting information about, you know, like how big is a Portuguese man of war, and historical things like Jack the Ripper and stuff. And, you know, as EBSCO as well, and there's lots of different aggregators out there. So there's things you can do, like conference call bingo is an example here, just fun things to do to keep it an interactive session. I was on a call the other day where we had to get a piece of paper, and we had to take 20 seconds, and we had to draw what they said, like a giraffe on a boat. And then we would all show each other what we did, but you have to have your eyes closed. So that was something that was a bit of fun. But use the social channels that you have available to you, and bring your own beverage, bring your own beer. When you're doing these networking events, you could all just make sure that you have a beverage of your choice. You could talk about that. Maybe you could set a challenge and say, you have to have a beverage that's local to you. So sadly, I don't live in Russia, but actually we do have vodka here that's made in Wales. So that's a bit of a bonus, about 45 minutes down the road from me. So that would be me. But that's something quite fun that you could do as an example. So in terms of when you're thinking about all your marketing, don't just think, oh, you know, I've got to do the marketing around this event, and once I've done it, that's it. No, there's loads that you can do with an event afterwards. So I touched on this before, but you can digitize bite-sized chunks of your content. So for example, if I had an interview and a certain part of it was on a specific industry topic that's very much of interest, I could cut out that part, and then I could reuse that and repurpose it and use it in remarketing activities. So then it's more digestible, because it's a shorter bit of information that people can have access to. You can gate content, as I mentioned before, after a period of time. If it's really relevant, content is king, remember, discoverability is queen. So also in terms of thinking about having flexible options, so don't tie people into a year, maybe tie them into 6 months, or give them a 3-month period, for example, or even if it's just a week, even if people just need access for a certain amount of time. But don't make it too complicated for yourself and give them too many options, because you need to have an automated system to be able to manage that for you rather than you doing it manually. Publish any results that you do. So in breakout sessions, one of my bugbears is that we can have these really great discussions, but nothing's ever published, or if it is, I hardly see it. Use something like Figshare as a repository to add your results into, and then that'll create a DOI, which is a digital object identifier, gives it a unique identifier that you can then link to, and then you can get things like altmetrics scores, because Figshare and altmetric are sister companies that sit under digital science, and so you can see an altmetric badge, for example, so you can measure the impact of the work that you're doing, and also you're disseminating and communicating to the community and sharing what was discussed at that event, which is only going to help in terms of raising awareness of the event, and also marketing it for future people joining and seeing the value of it. So use feedback gained throughout to learn and develop and just make things better. And I just want to show you a couple of case studies, because I know that we're coming near to the end now. So I found an example earlier of Torbay Libraries, and this is how they have gone online. So their music, rhythm and rhyme online is now available online, and also Storytime online with one of their local libraries. So it just shows you that just because you're a library and you are delivering all these fantastic events doesn't mean that you can't then go on to deliver virtual events. And actually you're also opening yourself to a much wider audience, and you're being able to, and so if you're thinking in terms of like tourists, so Torbay down in Devon, if you're thinking in terms of wanting to have tourists come in or be more visible to tourists, so that you're bringing more footfall in, that could be a strategy that you're looking to do, because for libraries, footfall is really important. Often now libraries are treated like commercial businesses, or they have to demonstrate return on investment to stay open. And you know, libraries are incredibly essential to us in the communities, and I think especially in the situation that we're in right now, we really see how significantly important libraries are. But also some people don't realize, and this is a bit of a shout out from me, that you may find that your library has freely available resources that are available online, like ebooks, that you can access for free. So do check out your local library website to see what they've got, and also these events that they've got going on. Research Impact Summit, I already talked about that, which is a 2-day research impact conference that's run by Tamika with a mixture of live and pre-recorded content. And she literally has an agenda, and then when the time happens in the agenda, then the content is available. And it's up for about a week, I think, so you can access it. She is in Australia, so it is working in Australian time, but it's a global event, and I can access it here in the UK. Redux is a really nice example that Alps turned their biannual event into a series of free webinars this year to make sure that they were enabling people to be able to continue to access the content, and the speakers were able to deliver this important content. Society Street, or just to mention with Alps, what they did do is they did say to delegates like myself, you know, we can refund you, or you can contribute your registration fee to this event, which we did. We took part back, and then we, because we had 2 registrations for Redux, we took one back, and then my one was used to go into their pot to be used to do lots of fun and exciting things with these series of webinars. Free webinars. Society Street 2020, that was a new event, and they've turned a physical event into online webinars as well. London Book Fair, you know what, that was that was cancelled, and disappointed that they didn't do something virtually, because I was booked into the conference part for the scholarly communication side, the academic publishing side, so I was very disappointed about that. And let's hope that maybe they might look to do that in the future. For some, you know, turning things around super quick and getting things done virtually was just, you know, it was just too much, because that was kind of like at the beginning when we were just about to go into lockdown and everyone wasn't quite sure, and they cancelled. Open Commute Project, as an example, they turned a global summit into a virtual event, and attendees take part in one-to-one sessions and activities. The Geneva International Motor Show was cancelled, but what they did, because they do a lot of launches there, they had pre-recorded launches and live stream press conferences, so attendees could attend and see the latest launches, which was great. This is another example where Domopalooza made the decision to transform it from an in-person event for 3,000 people in Salt Lake City, Utah, to one that is 100% digital. And so their event includes digital breakout sessions and keynotes. And then IBM's Think Conference, they've really gone with the live streaming content interactive sessions. I mean, there used to be a bit of a mix before on the physical and the live side. So it really shows you the different opportunities that there are out there. Finally, I just wanted to very quickly run through this because I know I've got some questions to answer. But just in terms of, it's been very impactful for professors out there. And Leonardo, he's a mathematician at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council in Buenos Aires. And he's also a maths professor at New York University, Shanghai in China. Now, he was over in Buenos Aires when lockdown happened. So he had to quickly learn how to teach online, which he'd never done before. And I'll say that it probably has taken him a long time to be able to work out how to teach online and to do his courses. But he was working with a time zone 11 hours ahead of him. So what did he do? Well, he used VoiceThread and he recorded short videos. So rather than his longer lectures, he did these short videos explaining these mathematical concepts, about 15-30 minutes in total for all of the videos. And then the students would watch them in their time zone, and then they would either record themselves and they'd critique what someone else had done, or they critique what he's done, or showing themselves do it. So he had that two-way interaction going on. And then his advice was, he just said, seek constant feedback, learn from your mistakes. He said, I'm the director of this movie, but we're all in this together. And he said, you know, if you haven't met the students before, schedule live sessions with them. But actually he knew his students, but he found that it was 3 times more work than a traditional lecture. So he's been working 35 hours per week preparing this online content. And this was a nice story from Springer Nature. But that just shows, for someone who didn't know how to do it, where he's got to now, and actually probably doing it over the past few months. He's probably got a lot slicker at doing it and hopefully learned along the way. So just to conclude, have a go. Absolutely, just have a go. Engage with your audience. I know I haven't done much engaging with you, but I am asking you a Q&A. I normally do lots of engaging, but I haven't for this last one. Find the right solution for you and what you need it to do. Make it interactive and fun, which I could have done with this, but I've got so much content to talk about. I just thought, oh, I'll just deliver this content. Measure what you're doing, and that's really important, because stop doing what's not effective and what's not efficient. Make the best use of the content that you have, not just during your conference, but after. And there we go. Any questions? So we are at time, but I am going to cover any questions. If you do have anything that you want to specifically ask me, do make sure that you pop it in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through a number of questions that we have. If you do have to drop off, you will get a recording to this. So how can you communicate value to potential attendees who are used to getting a physical event for their money? So as I mentioned before, apples and oranges, right, with physical and virtual events. And you can't say that that you're going to get the same experience. But what you can do is you can make it fun, interactive, and make sure that they get the best out of it. So remember that visual, auditory, kinesthetic, those VAC learning styles. Make sure that you're getting the most out of the people that are attending, so that they walk away from it and go, okay, so I didn't have that physical interaction of being able to talk to someone face to face, but actually in the networking session, they sent me off on a blind date with someone that I've really been wanting to speak to and that I haven't had the opportunity to speak to before. Or they've made me more accessible so that people could come into a room and come and talk to me and ask me questions. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Is it enough to simply replicate conferences with online sessions, or do we need to be more creative? I'd say absolutely be more creative. I mean, content is king, but also in terms of what people get out of it. Now, I hope that people that attend this session, who are attending it right now, who are watching it on Facebook, have actually got something out of today. At least one thing would be my core objective for this webinar, that one person would learn at least one thing or have some food for thought. So you can't simply replicate a conference that's a physical one, but you can do a lot more fun and exciting things. But then of course with a physical conference, there's lots more things that you can do, like the Alps one that I attended last year had like a running session. But mind you, you could set everyone a physical challenge, and you've got a video, right? So you can actually see what they're doing. Okay, is follow-up important with virtual events to make sure that they're tangible outcomes? Yeah. The great thing about these virtual type of events, especially if analytics are important to you, is that you can see how many people attended, what kind of interaction that they had, how they're interacting in the session, whether they go a bit quiet, whether you know that they're watching, whether they've gone up and they've opened up another screen, and so your screen isn't as active for them. There are different types of services that will offer you different type of analytics, but you can certainly make sure that you can learn how to keep them interactive. I'd say with a webinar, especially if it's like an hour long, which I know I said like 25 minutes really. If you have an hour long one, start off with a poll at the beginning to assess your audience, to ask them what their level of experience is. So, for example, if I was doing a how to get published to a researcher audience, then I would ask them at the beginning whether they've published with a specific publisher. Say, for example, if we're doing it for a publisher, I'd ask them, have they published with that publisher before? And they may say no or yes, and I could say, right, 60% said no. And then I would ask them a question in the middle to make sure that I'm still getting them engaged, and it might be specific to the content that I'm talking about. And then at the end of the session, because ultimately my objective was to make sure that they would feel that they can then publish with that publisher and they feel more empowered and enabled, I would then at the end ask them, how likely are you to publish with them now? And then when I go into some of these systems, I can see who responded what, and then I could specifically match them with what they answered in the first one, and then a take at home from me from that I could then report on to my line manager as part of my performance objectives, or to editors, or to whoever it was, or even to my client, was to say 60% that had said that they hadn't published with you before are now saying that because of this webinar that they are 80% more likely. So you know that your webinar did a good job. So as an attendee of a virtual event, if you struggle getting into the online sessions, is it okay to ask the organizers for tech support? Absolutely. So one thing you can do there, like in this webinar that we're in now, is that you could direct everyone, if they have any tech queries, to do it in the chat, and then you have someone manning that chat. And then you can keep the Q&A specifically for Q&A. Now, you can't see what people are asking me unless I make it openly available for you to see. I'm not going to be busying up the Q&A, but in terms of me as hosting this and presenting it, I want to make sure that I can quickly and easily just see the questions and answers. So I would put that into a chat box, or if it was the same function, I would have someone that would filter them out for me. At Workcast, for example, you can prioritize questions that come in or comments, and then you can put them into a certain area. So me as a host, I can just go into that area. So I've got a nice clean view. So absolutely ask for tech support. You may find that it's just a simple refresh of a screen. It may be that Chrome, for example, might be the more dedicated, a better browser to use. And worst case scenario is you'll be sending them a link to the on-demand version. Okay, so I think that that is all the questions that we have. If you do have any other questions, please do let me know. But thank you so much for attending this. Now, this is the final webinar that we have in this series, and you will be receiving, as a registered user, if you're watching this on demand and you've got this link somehow because I've given it to you, or Megan's given it to you, or someone in the team's given it to you, or even we've made it openly available for a certain amount of time. You will get a link to this session, and we do host them in YouTube in a hidden area. And there are another number of other sessions. So if there is something that you're specifically looking for and you didn't get to register for it, just reach out to us at team@internationalbunch.com and let us know. we are going to be looking to do a webinar series, which is going to be done on a monthly basis. And we're going to be doing more like a hints and tips following in from our YouTube series. If you haven't seen our YouTube series yet that we have, then make sure that you go to YouTube, look for the International Bunch and subscribe to our channel and get notified of any updates when we post new content. That's really important. We've got some great stuff already on there, but what we're going to look to do is have a webinar series that is going to cover things which would be to do with like the best return on investment for, you know, how you're analyzing emails, for example, any changes that we know that's happening in the industry on marketing structure level, or storytelling techniques. That's another example. We're often commissioned to do bespoke training for teams, and storytelling is one that comes up. Also, online tools like Trello and Asana, we do lots of training in that as well. And also in these systems, we do training with Workcast and we do training with Zoom, and a variety of these different types of systems to make sure that you get the most out of it. So I don't see that we've had any additional questions come through. We will send you an email with a link and also any additional resources. It may not come through this week, it may be next week, but it will be coming soon. So thank you so much for those of you that attended today, and those of you that are watching on demand, and those of you who are watching on Facebook. Really, really appreciate you taking the time, and wish you all the best. And now the thing is with Zoom, it takes a little bit of time to actually find the end button. So sometimes you might see me just flailing around the system trying to find out how to end the call. But there we go, I've found the button. So yeah, thank you so much. If you've got any questions or queries, give us a shout, and you can also find us online. No, I didn't create a hashtag for this webinar, but you can find us online. So thanks so much, everybody. Wish you all the best, and take care.